Uncertainty is the only certainty in business, and our ability to change will define our survival. We are in the middle of increasingly uncertain times. Global upheaval broadcast to the palm of your hand. And the velocity of mission-critical decision-making is coming at us at unprecedented rates. Technology advancement that once took 30 to 40 years to develop into everyday knowledge
Just flick a switch on the modem.
is now being compressed into a matter of months. And what's at stake? Not only the future of the business world, but the world itself. Can the power of AI empower us? Revolutionizing decision-making, bridging the skills gap, cutting unnecessary steps, maintaining agility. The cost of not doing so is far too high. But we have the ability. We all do. We just have to stay out in front, adapting to the pace of change.
Up next, Exiger. Please welcome Carrie Wibben Kaupp.
Okay, hi everyone. That video was intended to be a little bit of a scene setter, but also a call to action. I'm going to talk, this is the theme for the day, and time's going to go really quick, but we're going to try to maximize it, and I'm going to talk a lot about impact and results today. A little about me, very quick background. I grew up in the heartland of American manufacturing. My family built things, equipment, parts, systems. West Point grad, first 10 years of my career in uniform as a warfighter, next 10 years as a civil servant. And the point in my government career, which ultimately led me here to Exiger, focused on solving the problems that we solve, was really when I was serving as the head of counterintelligence for the Department of Defense for 5 years. And I was read into every counter-espionage investigation that the FBI had open on DoD, all of that involving IP theft from within the defense industrial base. China knew our supply chains, knows our supply chains, knows where our IP is flowing better than we do, and they are employing multiple threat vectors simultaneously to steal it at scale before we even know it's gone. I knew then that we had to deploy advanced technology to gain that same visibility, to even play defense, much less play offense. That's what led me to Exiger. What we do, we operate at the intersection of supply chain, cyber, and compliance risk. We are the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for supplier risk management, as was mentioned earlier. And we support 150 of the Fortune 500 companies, over 60 government agencies, Dell, AWS, Lockheed, Raytheon, DHS, Department of Defense, Commerce, pretty much every cabinet level agency. We are FedRAMP accredited, our platform is highly trusted, and I have to give a big shout out to Snowflake. One of the best strategic partners we could ask for, allows us to deploy our technology through the data exchange in a way that is truly non-invasive. All right, I'm gonna go through 5 hard problems, supply chain problems that are real, right now problems facing the defense industrial base, and talk about how we are actually helping to solve them, and hopefully in the process prove to all of you that these are solvable problems. The first problem is China weaponizing the periodic table. The periodic table is under attack. Hopefully everybody is well aware of that at this point. We saw China for decades preparing for this moment to execute this playbook. And they really started executing it about 2 years ago and then accelerated that over the last year. Antimony, when antimony was announced, the ban on antimony was announced, the White House called down to DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, and they said, DLA, what does this mean? How bad is this? What is the context here? DLA looked in a system called FLIS and said, we see 500 parts that are impacted by this antimony restriction, this export control that China had just placed. They came to us and they said, Exiger, what do you see? We said, we see 11,800 parts. visibility far exceeding their capacity. And then we were able to very quickly map those parts that had that critical dependency on antimony to specific weapon system designation codes with essentiality codes so that we could tell the government exactly what weapon systems would be rendered inoperable if that part that was reliant on that mineral was no longer available or in the sustainment process. We then leaned in and said, China's not going to stop, right? I know that like the back of my hand, they are not going to stop. They're going to keep going. So we leaned in, mapped the entire periodic table, developed models on top of it to be able to do this at speed, at scale, for any part, anytime. The way this is applied to the defense industrial base, to our clients, is through basically mapping their bills of material. So, you know, there's a picture of a supply chain here representative of many supply chains, F-35, F-250. I don't care what it is. A lot of people think supply chains are like pyramids. They're actually like diamonds. You see at the bottom, right, of this supply chain, most of the roads lead to China. Most of the time we end up having a critical dependency on a mineral that we can no longer source or have a very difficult time sourcing. So in the case of critical minerals, as I think most folks are aware at this point, we have 100% reliance, import reliance on China for 10 critical minerals. We have 50% import reliance for another 30 critical minerals. So companies like Raytheon, right, and many others that we support are really struggling with what does this mean for them. So RTX, one of our most mature clients, has now given us their entire master production schedule. We have mapped the critical mineral content and manufacturing processes for over 1 million parts for Raytheon. And in the process, they were able to actually realize $200 million of cost savings in mapping those 1 million parts and decomposing those 1 million parts, and realize an ROI of 200x. We also are able to map classes of parts. So we took machine parts, mapped that entire supplier ecosystem, about 1,700 suppliers representing $4 billion of spend, and in the process help them identify where they have reliance on Chinese and Russian sourcing, and then eliminate those suppliers from their ecosystem, reinvest that bottom $1 billion of spend into those high trust, high reliable suppliers. Those are impacts, those are results. Another example, the way we deploy the same technology against a large platform, the Navy asked us just actually a week ago to tell us what we could see in our system on the Constellation class frigate. You may know something about this ship. It has been plagued by cost overruns and delays. It has never left the dry dock. It was intended to replace the very troubled littoral combat ship. And so in 48 hours, we turned this comprehensive analysis. Some of the highlights are here. We could see exactly why this program is incredibly tortured. It has, well-intended. The Navy wanted to leverage an established, proven design, so they leveraged the European FREM design for the ship. And then they proceeded to take that European design and that spec and conform it to Navy standards. They layered on a bunch of requirements. The vertical launch system, they implemented different systems that had their own supply chain issues, the LM 2500 engine. And then they started to add things on. We want it to be 30 feet longer. We want it to be 10% lighter. We want 10 more launchers, right? Exacerbating the foundation, the already fragile foundation of this weapon system. We then looked at the parts and we saw hundreds of parts with over 1,000% year-over-year price increases. We saw 50% of the parts are single sourced, and we saw 50% of those that have no competitive acquisition whatsoever. No wonder $6.9 billion of investment later, not a single ship has left the dry dock. So whether the Navy decides to continue with that program or sunset it, right, we can provide that analysis to give them the justification or the data points they need to fix it. Unfortunately, they didn't do this analysis 5 years ago, or we would not be where we are. Single points of failure. This is, again, when you have that much criticality on single sole source suppliers and you have no alternatives, you have situations like what happened when we were monitoring the Bradley fighting vehicle for the Army Materiel Command. We were monitoring that entire supply chain. We identified in February one of their critical sole source suppliers, SPF Technologies, suffered a 4-alarm fire. Very quickly alerted them and DLA and our other DoD clients to this issue. DLA asked us to help them understand the full breadth and impact of this disruption, this major disruption in the supply chain for DoD. We quickly were able to detect 38,000 parts, 3,500 of which were sole source parts, where SPS Technologies was creating specialized fasteners that were high strength, cadmium plated, nobody else could source them, and we're able to quickly help DoD understand the significance of this problem. The kicker is, unfortunately, there was a lot of smoke before the fire, no pun intended. This company, for years, had OSHA violations, EPA violations. This was a disaster in the making, and it was predictable, and unfortunately, nobody was looking and nobody was monitoring. Finally, adversarial influence. This is a oldie but goodie. Back in 2021, we were doing the Stryker supply chain for Army ground combat systems, identified at Tier 2. Evraz, a steel manufacturer, is owned by a Russian oligarch. Pulled the thread on that, identified 10 more programs where that same company was a critical sole source of that supply chain for 10 more weapon systems. Pulled the thread on that, identified that there's actually a whole network of Russian oligarch-owned companies across the defense industrial base. Happy to share that analysis if you don't know about it. That was then shared with State Department in the early days of the Ukraine invasion to inform second and third order effects of sanctions if we were to sanction all of the Russian oligarchs. And fast forward, this company, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of alternatives. We have Cleveland Cliffs, which just closed their manufacturing plant last month. We have Timken, that has all kinds of subsidiaries in China, and we have Evraz. Those are really the options, right? So critical vulnerability for steel manufacturing, and this is just, again, a very high-level assessment of this problem. The good news is Evraz North America just announced last week a pending sale to a US firm, so hopefully we're headed to a more resilient future here. In closing, this isn't just a data and visibility problem, this is a stakeholder problem. So what we also do is enable every stakeholder in an ecosystem to view these problems the same way. You can't solve every problem everywhere all at once. You have got to enable a single pane of glass for every stakeholder who has to be involved in the solution to view the problem the same way, to prioritize and get after it. These problems are solvable, and if we get together, we prioritize and we agree to solve them and how to solve them, this is how we reindustrialize resilience, and ultimately, this is how we win. Thank you.